Sam, it seems like these, whether it's Grinder or other dating apps, it seems like it's kind of like playing the slot machines, right? You go on there, you get the ideas, you got to play to win, so you jump on there, and maybe winning's different for different people depending upon what they're looking for. But there's kind of an element of operant conditioning and playing the slots when we're on these things. What do you think?
I totally understand why you are thinking that it's like playing the slots, because there's a degree of like, how do I make myself the hottest, most attractive, like to potential partners? And we spend a lot of time editing and re-editing. And, I know of guys who like do sort of like mini experiments with their profile pictures, or like they'll have a shirt on, they'll have a shirt off, just to see like the type of response that they're getting. And then like, who knows, like, and with the way that Grindr is designed, the partners that you find is sort of like, who knows, right? It's like, who's on right then, who are you around at that time? And there's sort of this, so it can feel like, okay, I gotta always be checking, looking, making it better, optimizing, figuring out how I can, find the best sex partner, best mate, boyfriend, whatever. And on both sides of the equation, right? For your own self as well as for the people that you're looking for. So yeah, I understand why you're calling it a slot machine. I've also heard it called sort of just like this, just like endless, like process of, there's no way of ever like achieving the goal, because you're just always going in and going back and back and back. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you think about a slot machine, or you think about a casino, right? Which is a timeless place. There are no clocks. In most cases, you can't see outside of windows, so they don't want to they don't want folks to know what time of day it is, and they want to keep you engaged. And you think about whether it's Grindr or these other apps, they celebrate whether it is a message or somebody's looking at you, you're getting a notification, you're getting some element of a small victory of some sort. Even if it's not connecting in person, it's somebody might be interested in you. You better not get off of this app because you're winning right now. Or they're trying to give the appearance that you're winning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And, I think something that I would say in like the last 2 or 3 years in my research, I've started to pay a lot more attention to how these applications are designed, and the design choices that, the people at Hinge, the people at Tinder, the people at Grindr have made to keep you on their apps, because, you're their product. And so, yes, I think that's why we see these, the match on Tinder, like, and why that's so exciting is, there's a small little reward that comes from going through and getting your little match, or getting your woof, or whatever it is, whatever the branded language of communication is. Yeah, I totally see like that, because their product and what they want is for you to be on the apps and stuff, and cultivating relationships and continue to being on the apps. They are building the applications to encourage that type of behavior. 100%.
So let's talk about your research for a little bit. So
okay.
So at a 30,000 foot level, why are people have multiple reasons why they're on these apps. So what are some of the kind of the general motivations for people to be on them?
Okay. So, I mean, of course, sex and relationships, definitely high on the list, but I think it would be a bit naive to say that that's the only reason that people are on there. I think what we have just been talking about is this a little bit of degree of entertainment. There's some, and there's work going on talking about how, with the commodification and sort of making ourselves into like a market that happens in online dating, we are starting to use online dating as a form of entertainment. Oh, I'm bored, so might as well log into Tinder, or might as well, scroll through Grindr or whatever it is. And so our relationships and like forming relationships is becoming some way for us to kill time and entertain ourselves, which I think is quite fascinating, right? When you compare it to like courtship and, you know, how formal and very intentional sort of process that was. You know, something that some of my work touched on back in the day was about like community. And, you know, so I'm a gay man and I grew up in Utah, and I really felt isolated and I didn't know what was going on. But I had heard of this application called Grindr, and you know, it was just nice to like see a visible gay presence in the land of Utah. And so like something that I wasn't seeing in the research, you know, there was a lot of stuff about sex and like HIV prevention and stuff, but there was something that I felt what was missing was this moment that I was having as like oh gosh, I was like probably 21 at the time, and like coming to terms with the fact that I was gay. And it was just nice to be able to see the community that existed there. And there's research showing that that's some of the reasons that people are using Grindr specifically. I think as we switch into different applications like Tinder, for sure the entertainment portion might still apply, and of course the sex and dating stuff would still apply, but maybe a little bit less of this like community element or friendship element, because you know, when you're working with a smaller market of people or a smaller community of people, the internet, we know, is a great place to meet those people and connect. You know, it just so happens that sometimes it happens in the weird context of Grindr instead of a Facebook group or something like that. But yeah, so you know, everybody sort of kiboshes the idea that like you can go on these applications, especially Grindr, for friendship. But I also know people who have made friends with people that they have met on Grindr. So yeah, I think there's a variety of reasons why people are using them. Hookups, of course, finding somebody to date, but there's quite a breadth of why somebody might be opening up that application, I think. Yeah.
So let's talk about affirmation for a second. So, you know, we think about affirmation on Instagram, and I talk about in the book, I talk about attention panhandling, that we're looking for attention, and certainly the rewards and likes that come on social media and comments about our lives being great or our shirtless selfies being great and all those different things. When we talk about affirmation, when it comes to something like Grindr, and individuals who are coming on, or even an individual who, as you described yourself, at 21 years old, who's isolated and who maybe has never encountered another gay man in person or whatever it might be, and now they're putting themselves out there, or even somebody who's older in a metropolitan area, it seems like where people are fishing for affirmation on this site, and that seems like a really bad road to go down to. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
So what do you mean by fishing for affirmation?
Because, you know, I go on and I get lots of comments from people saying that I look good, that whatnot, or if people aren't commenting, there's an element of self-esteem, right, that's being impacted. I'm getting lots of comments, my self-esteem is high. If nobody's interested in me on the app, my self-esteem is low, and how I feel, that element of self-presentation theory and whatnot.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, I think there's absolutely truth in what you're saying, in like that there's a degree of almost panic that like sets in if you're not getting comments, or people aren't, you know, you're not making matches, or, you know, because like it means something about you. It means something that like you're not good enough, that you haven't found the right elixir to sell like yourself to find that partner for whatever reason. But I also think like that isn't it, right? Like I actually like I think that we are actually forming like authentic, meaningful connections on these applications, and to sell them as only like self-affirmation moments, it doesn't necessarily capture the the relational qualities that actually do take place and the meaningful ways that these applications can actually impact your life. Of course, like, you know, this sort of spans beyond Grindr or Tinder or whatever, you know, Instagram, if you don't get those comments, like there's or those likes, you know, people take down the photos, or there's all sorts of interesting practices that people do to help help this, you know, get this a degree of affirmation and, you know, social, oh my gosh, show social status. That's what I'm trying to say. But you know, it's in these cases, you know, when I think about Instagram, it's a lot about maintaining relationships quite a bit with like your friends and family. In these dating applications, which, you know, our center of our conversation, is a little bit more about developing and initiating relationships. And I think you'd find research that would say both are happening simultaneously. And also that like posting a hot selfie isn't necessarily like isn't you screaming like, I have low self-esteem, please help me. It could also be meaning like, I look good in this photo and I'm okay with that. And it's a celebration of yourself. And, you know, there's a lot of good work sort of pushing back against this notion that like selfies are a form of narcissism, or, of course, there is a grain of truth in there, but they're more complicated little moments than that. So yeah, I think it's a balance that is important to recognize. We often find ourselves panicked or worried about what these applications are doing to our ability to form meaningful, you know, long-term relationships or whatnot. But, you know, there's good research showing that you can have developed long-lasting, meaningful relationships with somebody that you've met through your mobile phone, I guess would be more accurate here. So yeah.
So what about choice overload here, right? So we are inundated with choices. There are, whether you're on Tinder, whether you're on Grindr, or any other of these apps, you are swiping at hundreds, if not thousands, of people within a day or within a week or whatever it might be. And even if you're meeting someone, it is that person versus a larger field, right? A larger field, you always have access to that larger field. You know, so, you know, would you suggest that it becomes a lot more difficult for people to cultivate meaningful relationships because they have access to this huge field, and they just become, you know, that element of paradox of choice. They just become inundated with choices that they can't commit or make any type of decision?
So so choice overload, the way that I understand it, right, is like the more choices that we have, the less satisfied we become with like the choice that we make, because they're and I think that there is this is like a current sort of pressing question in what I see in the online dating research with the question of choice overload, because there's growing recognition. Like when we try to finding a partner online versus finding a partner through your social network or at church or wherever else you might find a partner, one of the things is the number of people that you're given access to, and so a few experiments have that, you know, I didn't do, but some really smart people like Catalina Toma at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, Madison, did, where they manipulated the number of people that people saw when they were going through and trying to make a choice for somebody to go out on a date with. And they found like exactly what we would expect, that, you know, the more choices you had, the less satisfied you were with that person, the less the more willing, like more you wanted to like go back and maybe scan through again and make sure that you found the right person. and stuff like that. So I do think like we see some evidence that there is choice overload happening. I'm also reminded of a great researcher, Sam Chan out of Hong Kong, who, you know, he does qualitative work, and when he was interviewing gay men about their Grindr use, they just felt like a degree of just like resignment to the amount of options that they were, and so they just sort of, you know, almost it became sort of ambivalent about like finding a partner or going on dates and stuff, because it's just like, I'm never gonna, like, there's never gonna be the right person, you know. So I totally think that there's good evidence that there's the amount of people that we're given access to is totally it has some potential to be a bit paralyzing, which is why you see sites like eHarmony giving you just like 4 or 5 options. Like when they do their special match algorithm, they give you like a tiny, like few, it's like every few days you get a few new matches or something like that, versus, you know, if you have premium Grindr or Tinder, you could just sit for 5 hours and do this. The one caveat that I would add to this, though, is that's really thinking in the short term. You know, are you happy with this date? You know, are you going to go on a second date or something like that? But the longitudinal research that happens with people who find an online mate, you know, there's worry about choice overload there too. Like that you'll like, because you found your partner online, that you'll never be happy in this relationship, because like, did I find the right one? Did I, like, there are 300 other people I could have picked from. But in the long term, that's not what makes a happy and successful relationship. It's all the stuff that happens in between the time that you meet and, you know, and whenever they come participate in the study, that's what actually ends up being the thing that matters in the relationship. So, so longitudinally, we may not see these choice overload effects, but, you know, tomorrow you might feel them. And so, yeah, so when you're scrolling through the apps, you're likely to feel them, but you can't, I don't know, maybe part of my message is, yes, you can establish healthy long-term relationships on these apps, but they do kind of have a sucky bit to them as well.
Using these complicated research terms like sucky. That's right. Well, I mean, but what I mean, I would think that what's contributing to that element of the issues of choice overload is just this notion of the curated profiles that people have, right? So, I mean, it's much easier to avoid a bad hair day when you're developing a profile on eHarmony or on Tinder or on Grindr or whatever it is, because you could take 500 different selfies and find the 360th that makes you look the best. And so you post that. And the one time that you went water skiing your entire life, and you post that on your profile, of course, people look at that and they go, oh my gosh, this guy or this girl looks great. They water ski. I mean, they're just a fun time. I want to have that fun time. And then they meet this person and the real world sets in. They don't look like their profile picture because they're not curated. And, you know, maybe their photo is, you know, before COVID and before they discovered binge watching and Haagen-Dazs and whatever. And so suddenly, now that's like a real human being. It's not a profile anymore. And you meet that real human being and you may not even think this, but implicitly you're going, you know what? I'm going back to the field. And I could just see people constantly going back to the field, that it's a really difficult for one human to beat that field. Does that make sense?
Yes. So what I hear you saying is a little like, reminds me of Catalina Toma, Jeff Hancock, Nicole Ellison, all really wonderful researchers in this area's work on online dating and deception. And basically what they find is, is like everyone's lying. You know, it's like 91% of profiles are lying. You know, they did this really interesting study. It's, you know, it actually predates like Grindr and stuff, but like they went to New York City and they took actual physical photos of people who were dating and then compared it to like their online profile. They weighed them, they measured how high, tall they were and stuff. But what they found is like 90% of people were lying, but they were lying just a little bit. Like it wasn't like, they were saying they were 6'3", but actually they were 5 foot or something like that. They were just embellishing just a little bit. And so they started to talk about this notion that they call profile as promise, in a similar way that you do like a resume, where like you embellish the good parts of the resume, you put the good things forward, you do, and sort of hide the bad things. And then, when you meet, like there's like everyone knows that everyone's lying just a little bit. And so we we expect some sort of down in terms of what this person is going to look like, how many pints of Haagen-Dazs they have actually consumed since that profile picture or whatnot. But what you say is actually really interesting in like, and something that I don't know, like if there's research about, which is like that acceptance of like, okay, everyone's lying, and like I am expecting a little bit, but how do we like compare that back to the optimized pool of people? So when we get the real life person and we know that there's this this pool of people still out there, do we recalibrate? Like, is there a recalibration of all the other pools that are happening, or do we just say, oh wow, this person isn't as good as this profile? Maybe somebody actually in this pool will be as good as their profile makes them seem. But I think I really do like this comparison to the resume that they talk about in like, of course, we do this all the time. Now we're doing it as in trying to find a partner to over embellishing in the right places and stuff. So.
And of course, all the people involved with the Numb podcast have very truthful resumes. Of course, just want to throw that out there. But some of the research regarding FOMO and social media might push back a little bit on that, right? Like saying that, the curated lives that people have, that we build these curated, like we showcase the best portions of ourselves. And if we know the people that we're connected with on, let's say, Facebook, we could say, oh, that's Charles. His life is not that interesting. I know he's posting every Tuesday that he's cliff diving, but he took 300 shots of that and he is milking that vacation from 2017. I know what he does. His life is, whereas if they don't know that person, there's that notion of FOMO, right? They're feeling like there's a better world out there. They have a better life than I do because they don't really know that individual. And so, it seems to me that it's kind of like you're like the world's worst poker player in a sense that you're bluffing about your life, but you're not really realizing that everybody else is bluffing or curating elements of their life too, or maybe lying or embellishing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I do think that most people recognize that everybody's embellishing on these profiles. Like, I actually was talking to a friend recently about, when we were both on Grindr and, and this moment of like we knew when we were going out, like when we were meeting these guys in person, that they weren't gonna be quite as cool or entertaining or as good of water skiers as I anticipated that they would be from their profile. But you're right in that there is definitely a difference between these people that we have a relational history with. When my sister or something like posts about her cute kids or something, I'm like, yeah, I've been in the house with those kids. Those kids are terrors. Versus, but because like I know her offline, we have a relationship.
Are your nieces and nephews subscribers to the Numb podcast? I mean, are they going to be hearing what their uncle's saying about them?
I mean, I have 30, so we could get some numbers up, and some of them are adults. No, I think they would admit that they're a little bit of holy terrors. but anyway, yeah, so I think not having that relational history does sort of force us to rely on our assumptions about online dating and like the general sort of average user of online dating versus somebody that we actually know. And I think that that's maybe more of like what I heard you saying, is that because we don't know these people, and it is possible, right, that like one of them isn't embellishing and they're going to be as wonderful as their profile, and their very curated profile makes them out to be. That uncertainty like sort of perpetuates and allows us to feed our curiosity and dissatisfaction with who it is that we're hooking up with, or who it is that we're going on an actual date with, or whatever. Yeah.
So I want to talk about two other things with you before I let you go. And the first is
Okay.
body image. So thinking about this element, going back to kind of similar to what we've already been talking about, this idea of comparison, right? Between especially an app like Grindr or whatnot, but maybe many dating apps, right? That body image influenced by comparing to other profiles that are curated and whatnot. Do we see trends in data that suggest that there's a higher probability of body image issues with users who are on these apps more often than not?
So social comparison is certainly an area of interest in the world of social media, sort of generally, which, online dating is maybe a part of that. Maybe it's a sister to it. But and I think it would be hard to deny that there is not social comparison that happens on these sites. And of course, if we're looking at people's profiles or messages or pictures, whatever it is that we're looking at, and like there is this natural human tendency for us to say, oh, they're hotter than me, oh, they are cooler than me, oh, they go on more fun vacations than me. That definitely happens. And so, you asked about body image, and so when the headless torso picture, the iconic Grindr headless torso picture, and and I think certainly that there is, if we take that research that I'm aware of from social media on social comparison and say, okay, theoretically this should apply here, it would be hard to deny that it could have some negative effects on people's body image. Yeah, so often people who are in my position, though, like the professor who studies social media, also mentions, though, like, but that's not the only process that's going on, right? Like there are other things that people do. You can meet somebody who's really attracted to you, and all, like, you can feel really good about yourself, or the medium itself is not going to be the 100% determinant of your body image and stuff. But I do think that it would be you'd be hard pressed to find. It wouldn't be hard to design a study and find exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, because I think there's this natural human tendency. Oh, he's hot, hotter than me. Ugh. Guess I should cut out bread or whatever.
So, Center for Humane Technology says that 77% of users on Grindr who are on it 54 minutes or more per day, which seems like a long time, are unhappy. Why are they unhappy?
Why are they unhappy? Okay, so something that we need to beat back with this statistic that you're providing is that the time that you spend on Grindr is the thing that is going to determine your outcomes on your Grindr experience, right? So if you go on Grindr and you are only looking for sex, or for people to send you nudes, or something like that, you're going to have a very different experience on Grindr than somebody who's going on and like trying to like thinking of myself, right? Trying to find, like realizing that there are other gay people in the world. And oh my God, like this is helping me cope with where I'm at in my process of figuring out my identity. And so my response to that statistic is I'm confused by it, because time alone is not a good indicator of media effects. We need to understand what people are doing on the sites, their motivations for being on the sites, and stuff. So I think about my own study that I did on Grindr, where we compared sexting and doing like self-disclosure when you're chatting with people and, you know, having authentic conversations. Sexting was unassociated with any outcome. People were doing a lot of it, like tons, like it was huge. The numbers were so much higher than any other thing in our data set, but it was associated with nothing.
Meaning, what does that mean? So associated with nothing, meaning there was no ROI for the individuals that were sexting. Is that what you're saying? There was no perceived benefit?
Yes, there was no benefit. It wasn't associated with their affect. It wasn't associated with their loneliness. It wasn't associated with their homophobia. It wasn't associated with anything. It wasn't associated with intimacy either. It was just sort of something we did a lot of. That's it. Whereas what we found in this project is if you went on, you were discussing, you know, having actual conversations in the messaging application with other gay and bisexual men, like that actually there was some sort of positive benefit from it. So I think that is a more fruitful way for us to think about why is Grindr helping me, like, you know, making me feel worse? You know, is it because of what I'm doing? I don't think it's useful for us to think about it as because I'm spending a lot of time on Grindr. I think it's more useful. Why are you there? What are you doing while you're there? Who are you interacting with? Are you interacting with the same people multiple times? Or are you just having, you know, hey, sup conversations with like 50 different guys during the week or what, right? So we can be thoughtful about our practices on these applications in a way that don't necessarily undermine our well-being, but we can also, I mean, I guess if you really want to undermine your well-being, there are ways that you can do it. But I feel like it's a more fruitful conversation for us to have of if we get into those types of questions rather than time. As a professor who teaches the social media and well-being class, like that's like the number one thing I hope the students leave the class with is time on social media is almost a meaningless predictor of what the outcomes will be, because they're so integrated into every aspect of our lives and are so complicated that time alone is like a really, really weak understanding of what's happening there.
So, I mean, that's a really critical point, right? So then it would be equivalent to say to the comparison of someone who is really looking to make meaningful connections of whether it's friends or dates or whatever it might be, and they're going to a bar and they're spending the same amount of time at a bar. Maybe it's 2 hours. It's not the amount of time, it's how they're approaching other people. If I'm hearing that correctly, that what one person's going up and saying, oh, you know, wants to have a meaningful, authentic conversation, while the other one's saying, hey, baby, come here often. I really like your pants. Clearly, I'm really good at pickup lines, as you could tell. But it sounds to me like that's the equivalent, is how you're interacting in the bar. Same thing as how you're interacting on these platforms. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, sure. I actually like what you're saying there, that, you know, when we think about the variety of ways that people can meet a potential partner, one not being better than the other necessarily, and, you know, finding a long lasting, meaningful relationship or finding a hookup, whatever you want. The approach, how you do it, those are the things that are what matter. In this situation and what we're talking about with Grindr, but if some listener is listening, I would say, and about social media. And that, I think, is the productive conversation to have, because the answer to the question about time is like, well, then just delete the application. But that's not a realistic understanding of our world today. It's not how gay men meet each other. It's COVID, that wasn't an option, right? It then allows us to have think about the right ways to be using these applications. It also informs something that we talked about at the beginning, these slot machine things, right? How could we design these better? Because time alone is not going to teach us that. But if we understand that, if somebody's coming here for the purpose of finding some type of social connection, that maybe we could encourage that type of behavior with the way that we're persuade the design of our application or whatnot. For me, that's the conversation that gets me excited. I think you could tell from the way that my demeanor changed during the interview when we got to this question, because I think that's how we should be thinking about it in 2020. I think this is how we should have been thinking about it when I was an undergrad in 2008. But now, come on, it's time to stop talking about time addiction sort of things and make a more well-rounded conversation about what's happening on these technologies.
And those of you that are watching the interview on the YouTube channel, you'll see that Dr. Taylor's demeanor did change, and it became very hopeful and inspired at the very end, which is a great way for us to finish. Dr. Samuel Hardman Taylor is assistant professor at the University of Illinois Chicago in the Department of Communication. Dr. Taylor, thanks for joining me today.
Of course, Charles.